Welcome everyone to the League of Women Voters Empowering You series. This program is designed by the League of Women Voters in partnership with Dayton Access Television to provide unbiased, nonpartisan information on issues that are relevant to our friends and neighbors throughout the greater Dayton area. My name is David Bodary. I am a member of the League of Women Voters, and tonight we'll be talking about an environmental issue that I think will be important for all of us. Of course, the League of Women Voters focuses on education as much as it does on voting and on various positions that the League holds with respect to government, social policy, and natural resources. So our focus today, given that it's April and Earth Day happens in April, we're going to focus on natural resource issues, specifically PFAS, the forever chemical, and the future of our water quality. Our guest today is Professor Blake Watson. He is the Samuel A. McCrae Chair in Law at the University of Dayton Law School. He's got a bachelor's degree from Vanderbilt University and earned his Juris Doctorate with distinction from Duke University. He has represented the United States before federal courts of appeal and state Supreme Courts in cases relating to the environment, natural resources, wildlife, and Indian law. My hope is today we can really talk about PFAS, where it comes from, and really what we can do about it. So, Professor Watson, thank you for joining me today, and I look forward to our conversation. Of course, Dayton sits on this aquifer, trillions of gallons of water, and yet the quality of that water could be potentially at risk, depending on how we manage the use of chemicals in our communities and in the environment around us. So can you help me understand this idea of forever chemicals and from there what we can do about it?
Yeah, I'll certainly try to do my best, and I'm glad you mentioned the city of Dayton and the aquifer that we sit upon, because it truly is a treasure, an asset for the city. It's something that we definitely need to protect. So PFAS, I think one of the hardest things to discuss about it is the complicated nature of the name and the chemical structure behind it. And I'm not a chemist, so I'll just simply say PFAS, P-F-A-S, is an acronym, and it's used for a variety of chemicals, polyfluoroalkyl substances. Hopefully I said that correctly. And my understanding is that these chemicals, they're man-made, and they were created first in 1938 by a DuPont chemist. So they have a variety of very productive and useful attributes. Products such as Scotchgard and Teflon use these chemical compounds. They are particularly resistant to water and oil, and so non-stick types of technologies. They've been used in clothing and textiles and other such products.
I think in tents, right, for camping or other kinds of camp gear might use that product or might have used
absolutely.
that product.
Food products, containers, other such things. So it's pretty much been universally part of our day-to-day lives. But it's only been in the last several decades, perhaps, that some of the downsides to the PFAS chemicals, or what are sometimes called forever chemicals, have really become apparent. They're called forever chemicals in part because they take so long to break down. And they're in our water, our soil, in fish, and actually in ourselves, in our blood.
So in forever chemicals, because not only do they take a long time, but in some cases maybe would not break down without some other, I don't know the right term, engagement, some other sorts of intentional efforts to try to separate these items.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think going forward, one of the biggest challenges is, and the University of Dayton is involved in this, challenges to create technology to treat and to dissolve, if dissolve may not be the right word, but certainly to treat, neutralize, and hopefully eradicate the problem.
Right. So in essence, trying to separate these chemicals so that they can be managed safely.
Right. The water treatment systems, the city of Dayton and cities all across the United States are extremely interested in dealing with this problem.
Yeah. So good. We have a sense of both the utility of why the chemical was invented, but then the risks associated with it. And of course, it is in the water systems, it is in the fish, it is in the soil, and it is in our bodies. The question next, I guess, for the chemist would be, to what level is that problematic, and we don't want to wait to find out. So
you don't want to wait to find out, and you're definitely hitting one of the key issues, measurement and trying to determine what levels are safe. I'll give you a quick example. My understanding is the state of Ohio been very much on the forefront of dealing with the issue. At one point set a part per trillion level, the level at 70 parts per trillion as a apparently safe level of PFAS in our water. Now EPA is coming up with a much higher level, 4 parts per trillion, as safe. So where exactly is what is safe and what is not is, I think, still under debate.
Right. Well, that's concerning, certainly. Your work in Washington, and I suspect your research since then, has led you to a couple strategies that you have found to be helpful in fighting both pollution and perhaps pollutants, the individuals that are polluting. Could we talk about those strategies, litigation and maybe regulation?
Yeah, absolutely. So a student that goes to law school and takes a course on environmental law often asks, well, what other course should I take if I want to go into that career? And I think any environmental law professor would tell them you should take administrative law. And they say, well, what is that? And it's really a study of how our government operates. Mm-hmm. And it's right, it's litigation, but it's also regulation. And so on that focal point with respect to PFAS, I think perhaps best to start with regulation. Regulation, if it works correctly, is supposed to identify the problem, we gain information about it, and we come up with potential solutions. Congress acts first, and they have acted. They've passed many environmental laws that can be utilized. The Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, what's popularly called Superfund. There's some other less well-known statutes that give EPA the ability to get the regulations in place, and EPA in the last few years has been acting. For example, probably one of the more important regulatory actions taken by EPA, and it's not done, but they have proposed some certain levels of safe exposure under what's called the Safe Drinking Water Act. Mm-hmm. And that will directly affect the amount of PFAS that is permitted in, again, public water drink supplies. And so that's something that's moving forward. But they've also proposed safe levels of substances with respect to what's called remediation, cleaning up existing problems, whether it be under the Superfund Act or some other federal law.
So if I think about regulation, I was trying to think of an example of regulation that maybe many of the viewers would be familiar with. I'm old, and so I remember leaded gas versus unleaded gas, and that would be an example of regulation, because we began to recognize that lead in our fuel had some pretty unintended consequences to the health of children especially, but anybody that was around it, and so we began to take the lead out of that fuel.
Yeah, I'm smiling because that's a great example, and a related example is reducing emissions from tailpipes. The reason I like those two examples, because in both situations, if you go back and you sort of read the history of it, the opponents of change said, well, we can't afford this. We can't afford to reduce the emissions to the amount that you are proposing. We can't afford to convert from lead to unleaded gasoline. And in those situations, experience has proven that we were able to accomplish those things, and those accomplishments produced so significant positive gains.
Yeah, absolutely. Safer environmentally, safer for obviously children. Those sometimes our first concern, but all of the users, all of the mechanics and the people that would have worked around fuels or emissions that we encounter. And of course, we also recognize that we don't see the same level of smog in our larger cities that we did at one time. Our sign language interpreter, Katie, isn't old enough to remember some of those things, but I am, and I suspect you too remember.
Absolutely. You know, and here's a challenge, I think, for us. Smog and in many cases water pollution are much more visible indicators of a problem, right? And so can we see PFAS chemicals? They're not something that we can point our finger to, and the amount is so small that it's so hard to wrap our head around. How do we deal with a problem that's so minute in sort of nature, but so significant in terms of its consequence?
Absolutely. And yet I want to be able to eat the fish, right? And so to the extent that I want to try to reduce the amount of these forever chemicals that might get into the water system, simply so that I can enjoy that environment better.
And if I may, the regulatory process is proceeding, and it's slow. A lot of things are slow. It takes time. And typically what's going to happen, I can predict this with absolute certainty, EPA will produce a regulation and they'll be sued. That happens as night follows day. The opponents of the regulation will say it's too hard, too harsh, and the environmental groups will say it wasn't strong enough. And so we'll work that out, and we'll get to something that hopefully will be put in place and implemented, and that will be a step forward. Meanwhile, there is also litigation, and the litigation proceeds in different ways, and a lot of times it's difficult to see the connect between a lawsuit and making progress to protect our environment, but there is a connection.
So let's talk about some examples of litigation. And in our earlier conversation, you mentioned that there has been a recent lawsuit.
Yes, absolutely. So I want to bring this to a local level. I can tell you, for example, the city of Dayton has been involved in 2 lawsuits. And in one of the lawsuits, they're seeking damages, monetary relief from the Department of Defense, and more in particular, the Wright Pat Air Force Base. What's that all about? It's predominantly because PFAS chemicals are found in what is called firefighting foams. Mm-hmm. And the Air Force Base, and for that matter, the city of Dayton's fire department as well, and many other fire departments have used this type of foam. And when it is used, it's released, it soaks into the ground, and detectable levels of PFAS were found in the water out at the base. So that resulted in a lawsuit that's ongoing. At the same time, the city of Dayton, as well as the city of Fairborn and Bellbrook, have filed a suit against 3M, who manufactures the fire foam product. And that's what has produced a recent development on April 1st of 2024 in a multinational sort of class action lawsuit. A judge announced that 3M was going to settle, and that settlement will produce up to, I believe, $12.5 billion to be paid out to 12,000 or so water treatment systems, including Bellbrook and Fairborn and Dayton, my understanding. Over time, it won't happen immediately, and that's money that's going to be spent to improve the treatment facilities.
Okay, so, and that's just recent, this year, April 1st, 2024. So that's a great example of litigation that is leading to change, because now that private industry company is going to be resolving their lawsuit, but then paying out from whatever profits, right? And in order to try to mitigate and to try to resolve or clean up, as it were, right, the effects of a product that they produced. That also means that they're probably thinking, well, I don't want to do that in the future. How can we change our product so that it doesn't have this adverse environmental effect?
Yeah, that's absolutely one byproduct of successful litigation. So this type of litigation is actually based not really on federal environmental laws. It's based on concepts that we developed over time to deal with other types of injuries. Negligence and trespass and nuisance. These are what are sometimes called common law claims, and they're exactly the types of claims that are being brought in these suits, but they're being applied to a complex situation. But at the bottom line, it's pretty evident there's a connection between the presence of PFAS chemicals and harm.
Right.
And that's the bottom line.
And I want to be clear, like the foam, firefighting foam, was highly effective at stopping the fire. I guess the question, though, is at what cost or with what effect, such that is there some other product that could be developed that wouldn't have the adverse environmental effect, right?
Absolutely. Maybe it brings us back to your example with the gasoline. We still want gasoline, we still use it, but can we do it in a different way?
In a safer way.
In a safer way.
And I think we see the same thing with respect to Teflon. I want a pan that my eggs don't stick to, right?
Absolutely.
But maybe I don't want one that also puts my environment, my family, my fish, right, at risk. So you got to find ways to figure that out. Are there other things that the average citizen might need to know in order to support meaningful, I suppose, regulation, right? How could the average citizen become maybe more informed or support the kinds of regulation that perhaps could change?
I think that's an excellent question, because it's so easy to be overwhelmed by the complexity of the whole issue. But at the other side of it, it seems to me that if you're interested and or concerned about this issue, there's some pretty readily available resources that you can look at. It doesn't take much time. One recommendation would be EPA's website. But here's some other recommendations. There's an excellent documentary called In the Devil We Know, 2018 documentary that's easily accessible. The Cincinnati attorney Robert Bylot, who spearheaded some of the initial litigation with respect to PFAS contamination, has written an excellent book called Poisoned Waters, and that book was turned into a movie called Dark Water. The movie's somewhat fictional, but it presents the issue in a way that one can comprehend and appreciate on a human level. And so those are areas that I think people can access to become more knowledgeable. But the other thing in terms of effectuating change is, in my opinion, is to be politically active. If one is concerned about particular issues and one believes particular candidates for office, whether local or national, are more inclined to be aggressive in promoting change in a positive direction, then perhaps that's an issue that one should really focus on in terms of how they decide on to cast their ballot.
Right. I appreciate very much what you're suggesting, and it reminds me of the statement I make a lot, that is that our engagement as citizens isn't a spectator sport, that we have to be engaged and active, and that means participate and not just vote once in a while, but to be knowledgeable, to do your education, to do your research, and then to obviously enact that vote based on the knowledge that you've gained. So I appreciate that very much. You mentioned the EPA. I'm going to make sure that that's epa.gov, so .gov
It
is the correct web address,
yes.
If you're looking for
If you
information.
Google PFAS and EPA, I think you're going to come up with the right site.
Okay,
Search
good.
it in some fashion.
And it sounds like soon you're also going to get a lot of notifications from legal firms that are going to say, oh, have you been affected by it, as we've seen
Possibly.
with other
Possibly.
kinds of things.
Yeah.
I joke a little bit. I don't mean to minimize it, though, that this is a real issue and we need to be attentive to it. And the more we learn about it, the better I think we are to.
Yeah, I think our local news has done an excellent job of covering the issue. City of Dayton has an environmental advisory board or committee that's comprised of citizens. And so there are ways to access or be involved.
Good. I appreciate that very much. Are there other things that you worry about as you sort of watch the environmental issues? And it could be water, but it might be other things as well.
Well, I think it's pretty clear to most people that the idea of global warming is something that we've moved into, in my opinion, a new phase where we acknowledge its existence. But again, somewhat similar to PFAS, it can be so easily overwhelming. What can we do? But likewise, I think the political drive to recognize and deal with the issue is critical. And we are taking steps to deal with emissions that cause global warming. To me, that's the main big environmental concern that we all share. It's a global issue.
Right. I appreciate that very much. On the other side, what gives you hope?
Well, I think that we have technology that can and often does rise to the occasion. We can't necessarily say, oh, technology will fix every problem. We need to reduce the problems and not rely on technology as a fix. But there is promise. I just recently read that, again, the University of Dayton has partnered with some private companies to deal with better ways to treat PFAS in water treatment facilities, and that gives me hope.
I'm thinking about University of Dayton. So is that through the chemistry department? Is it through UDRI?
Well, they have their research. I think it's UDRI, and
Okay.
I don't want to misspeak,
That's
but
all
I'm
right.
fairly certain it is. And the government involved, I mentioned earlier, regulation, but I don't want to overlook the fact that the government plays an extremely important role in providing funding. And so if the government provides funding for identification and classification of issues, we have more information, and with that information, perhaps our experts can deal with and develop the technologies that we need.
That's exciting to think that there are possibilities, although it's a difficult challenge.
It's a difficult challenge. I mean, you put a lot of money into this, and where does that money come from? It comes from taxpayers, and so you've got to make that connect that this is a good use of government funds because it can produce so significant changes for everyone.
Right. And I do want to live in a world where I have confidence in the water system, that I have confidence that my recreation on the local lakes is not going to put me at risk. So, I mean, I want that. I know that I also have to recognize that it comes with some additional responsibilities, right?
Well, I'm glad to hear that you want that, because probably the biggest challenge for environmentalists or anyone just generally interested in the environment is to make that pitch that people in today's generation need to act sometimes and sacrifice, money or otherwise, so that they can make a better future for future generations.
Well, thank you very much. We've talked today about these forever chemicals that are in the water systems of the Dayton region, as well as the state of Ohio and the Midwest, as well as the country and the globe. I think you said earlier there's evidence of PFAS even in Iceland.
Well, I heard Antarctica.
Antarctica.
But I'm guessing Iceland as well.
So it is here, and we have to figure out how to deal with it. You've given us a couple ideas in terms of regulation, but also litigation, and the ways in which those two sort of strategies might be able to help move individuals or corporations, or the individuals within the corporations, to begin to change the options for what is available. So we've seen that work in the past, whether it be in the automotive industry, in the oil and gas, but also I think we've seen it in other aspects of our lives in terms of clothing and other things. So we can make progress. It's not hopeless. I appreciate it very much. Is there anything else that you'd like to share on the topic?
Well, I just like the fact that we're focusing on this because I think environmental issues had a heyday, and then I think they've been relegated a little bit to perhaps a position that's less important in some people's minds. But at the end of the day, I think we both agree that the environment in which we live is absolutely critical. We can't ignore problems. We need to deal with them.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank our guest, Professor Blake Watson. He is the Samuel A. McCray Chair in Law at the University of Dayton School of Law. I want to thank you for watching the League of Women Voters Empowering You. The League of Women Voters encourages everyone to be active as a citizen in the community. This includes being educated about government, social policy, and environmental issues, to be registered to vote, as well as voting actively in every election. As we said today, democracy is not a spectator sport. It's not something we can watch and have happen and not have to deal with the impacts of what has happened. So your engagement is important. If you need help either registering to vote, perhaps learning how to vote, or if you have ideas for upcoming programs, you can contact the League by emailing league@lwvdayton.org. That's league@lwvdayton.org. Or you can call the office. The number there is 937-228-4041. Thank you, and thank you.
Thank you.